Hello, everyone, dear netizens. If 90% of you already know, we have made a decision regarding stock investments, then let's start taking action today. Let's start taking action today. And if there are no urgent notifications, the notification can be saved for your member. All right, on the 19th, the 5501 movement broke out in the United States. But what exactly is this 5501 movement? 50 protests, 50 states, one demand. All 50 states in the U.S., 700 cities participated, with an estimated 5 million people taking to the streets and 800 rallies. Today, I saw that there are tens of thousands of people in those big cities, tens of thousands in the big cities. Even the smallest towns have hundreds of people. 800 rallies, with some having 3 to several million people, possibly even 5 million. It's uncertain. Such large-scale demonstrations have happened a few times in history. One was Martin Luther King's civil rights movement. Another was the anti-Vietnam War protests. And this is the third major demonstration in American history, not just modern history, but in all of U.S. history. This should be ranked third. What are the main issues being addressed? Only 3. Opposition to the Toronto government's radical immigration policies. Condemn the expulsion of legal immigrants. Stop violating human rights. Demand the return of Gracia, an immigrant wrongfully deported to El Salvador, back to the U.S. This is in opposition to immigration policies, and some are family members of immigrants, employers, or human rights activists. Oppose tariffs that cause price increases. Ford and General Motors have already raised their prices. Then there's an anti-tariff declaration, which I talked about in another video. Then there's opposition to theft. Efficiency departments cutting civil servants. With the world's richest multi-billionaire interfering in government affairs, leading to layoffs. For example, he laid off many government employees from Social Security, resulting in slower processing, causing hardship for some people. This is in Miami, and this is in San Francisco. On the beaches of San Francisco, this is impeach and remove everyone, which requires hundreds of people, 500 to 600 in San Francisco. And that was in Miami. In Miami, he even hung the American flag upside down. Now is a time of crisis. And this is in New York, where there are tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands in New York, with 700 rallies, 700 rallies. U.S. President Donald Trump announced that he would reach a tariff agreement with Beijing within 3 to 4 weeks, but no one believes it. No one believes it. His insistence on direct dialogue with Chinese President Xi Jinping is what has caused this deadlock. I will explain from another perspective why the Chinese side is unwilling to talk with him. According to 2 former senior State Department officials and industry insiders, Donald Trump is unwilling to authorize a White House representative to go to Beijing to discuss easing the deterioration of U.S.-China relations. Currently, there is no substantial diplomatic contact between the U.S. and China. This situation dates back to 2020, reaching a point of no return before he left office, making it impossible for the 2 sides to discuss and understand each other's intentions, thus remaining deadlocked. A Brookings Institution researcher stated that informal channels between the U.S. and China cannot function because Donald Trump does not want these channels to be effective. He doesn't trust others to negotiate. He insists on leading himself. He insists on leading himself. He believes he is very capable, that his charisma is strong, and as long as he talks to Xi Jinping, everything can be settled. Donald Trump hopes to have direct dialogue with Xi Jinping. But before he took office, he said he could resolve the Russia-Ukraine war in a day, but after 100 days, he has now given up. In fact, his approach to resolving the Russia-Ukraine war was to pressure Ukraine into agreeing to all of Russia's conditions. But how could he have known about Ukraine? Now supported by the EU, Germany has recently increased its military aid to Ukraine sevenfold. He gradually realized that without aiding Ukraine, he couldn't force Ukraine to comply with all of Russia's demands globally. So, he had no choice. And since he absolutely refused to pressure Russia, he decided to wash his hands of it. Beijing's stance towards Donald Trump is cautious about direct dialogue between leaders because of what? If the two countries can't reach an agreement, or if they start making insulting remarks, Xi Jinping wouldn't be able to tolerate it. Oh, the Chinese government, on the other hand, suggested that non-representative envoys conduct the negotiations, so they changed the person, bringing in Li Chenggang, and asked the U.S. to send someone. The funniest part is the U.S. trade representative who, Lighthizer apprentice, appeared on the news, and when asked what he was responsible for, he said, "I don't know. I have to see what the president posts on Truth Social to understand his trade policy." That's how it is. Although many American business people tried to engage with the Chinese side, Beijing wondered if they could truly represent the U.S. government. Moreover, they felt that these business people were not official representatives, and the promises they make might be useless. Former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Daniel Russell, said that Chinese officials clearly prefer formal official channels rather than those informal representatives claiming to represent Donald Trump. They want an official channel for discussions. Let's look at MIT professor Wang Asheng's interview with The New Yorker, where he analyzes Xi Jinping's strategy and mindset in facing Donald Trump's tariff war. Donald Trump, 4, at the beginning of the month, imposed at least a 54% tariff on Chinese goods, and now the actual effective rate has reached 164%. China has taken countermeasures, and the market's reaction to Donald Trump's actions is negative. Over 60% of Americans dislike his tariff policies. Economists say it could lead to an economic recession, making the future full of uncertainty. The Chinese government does not want to engage in a trade war because China itself is not in a good environment. This year, in the first half compared to last year, exports still performed relatively well. Actually, those people took advantage of the situation before he took office to import more goods, so exports showed the best performance. Last year, China had nearly $1 trillion in trade surplus, of which over 200 billion were non-trade deficits, leaving 700 to 800 billion. The real estate and technology sectors contribute to GDP growth. The contribution is limited. Real estate, of course, I often go up to watch these videos. People flowed like this. In those areas that are not yellow, the property prices have dropped by 60 to 70%. In places like this, theoretically, it should bottom out. Well, those high-quality productivity in the tech industry, a lot of money has been invested, but the progress has been slow and steady. Wang Jiaxing believes that China is unwilling to make concessions because doing so would make the leadership appear weak, because he cannot show his weakness in front of the people because he wants to make China strong. And they do not trust Donald Trump to keep his promises. That's why the recent news suggests that it's not working. You need to have a consistent stance, a long-term consistent stance before negotiating. State your position once and for all, and don't keep changing it. If you keep changing, there's no need to talk. But this is the view of that professor from Massachusetts, and I've added my perspective. For example, giving more areas to China, the United States, people to do business and services, purchasing more soybeans, aircraft, and also oil and natural gas. These things and other commodities can be negotiated. Buying more pork, beef, and rice can also be deliberated upon and debated. But there are some things that cannot be negotiated, such as financial support for new productive forces and the monopolistic position of state-owned enterprises. Xi Jinping believes these are China's, his strategic advantage. Unique skills. Why is China catching up? It's because China has this national system. The national system, which means the government takes the lead, provides subsidies to develop certain industries. The government controls the most important resources, so it can concentrate efforts to accomplish big tasks. Without this system, if you talk about reforming it, then China wouldn't have made rapid progress, wouldn't have had the chance to overtake the US on the curve. This is why Xi Jinping is unwilling to discuss it. In fact, Donald Trump doesn't care either. Whether Xi Jinping is a dictator, he doesn't care about that. But he feels that the mainland is taking advantage of the US, and the way it's doing so is not really through tariffs, but through non-tariff measures, especially with massive state subsidies and state-owned enterprises. Xi Jinping has said that this is China's fundamental interest. This is China's trump card for economic progress, and this cannot be conceded. This kind of thing must be firmly maintained. In the long run, the issue that China is most concerned about is technology. The US holds the key technologies that China needs for national and economic growth. In the end, the earlier round of speculation, a couple of months ago, there was a round. This is because of DeepSeek. Now, DeepSeek requires using X20 to explain to you because X20 is no longer allowed to be used. Without AI chips, if there aren't any, the Ascend chip of the year is also using TSMC's technology. Without AI chips, if they revert to using those subpar AI chips from the mainland, China will forever lag behind in the AI revolution and will not catch up. Since 2018, China has been vigorously promoting technological self-sufficiency, achieving success in electric vehicles and wind turbines. Those electric vehicles, although they imitate Tesla, China is the country that produces the most electric vehicles in the world, and they are the cheapest, competing fiercely with Tesla. As for lithium batteries and solar panels, it leads in these areas because of its large production capacity. Also, the wind turbines. However, technological self-sufficiency will also make China more susceptible to trade shocks. Because the cost of technological investment is high, the returns are distant and uncertain. Today, I have a video discussing how, when you use a national system to do these things, sometimes things can go terribly wrong. Today, I have a video that is meant to mock robots. This is it. Wang Jiasen said there is no evidence showing that China's large investments in the technology sector have brought substantial economic benefits. That is, he originally prepared, having spent so much money on electric vehicles. With such competition in electric vehicles, can they be exported? Can they conquer the world? But others will resist. So the result doesn't really help. GDP. China's GDP growth rate is declining. Productivity is slowing down, and the economic performance and job opportunities rely on exports, external demand. And when external demand is lacking, why is that? Wang Jiasen believes that the most important thing for China's economy is capital allocation efficiency, not just simply increasing technological investment. Let me put it in layman's terms. It's not about spending more money, but rather on productivity and growth capacity. It's about where the strength of the entire country is directed, where the capital is allocated, where the investment is made. Are you investing in things that must have high returns? High return investments are in private enterprises, while low return investments are in state-owned enterprises. Yet, you insist on investing all the money in state-owned enterprises, most of the money. Over the past decade, the role of China's state-owned sector has expanded, but its efficiency is not as good as the private sector. A large amount of capital investment has not led to productivity improvement or employment growth. The number of people they hire is limited. That's the issue. Moreover, productivity is not advancing. China's private consumption only accounts for 39% of GDP, while in the United States it's 70%, in Hong Kong it's over 70%, and in India it's 60%. This is the largest difference. As one professor mentioned, this is like committing suicide. These people. The reason for low consumption in China is the high savings rate. How do you explain the high savings rate? Because people are not confident about the future. I've mentioned before, when you invest in infrastructure and such things, I suggest it's better to distribute money rather than the few hundred yuan given to the rural low-income people. Now it's a few hundred yuan. How about increasing it to 500 yuan a month? Those people would feel much more secure. Also, the medical insurance write-off should cover up to 90%. This way, it would total around 3 trillion, which is much better than investing in infrastructure. Another reason is that the growth rate of private income is slower than GDP growth. What does this mean? Actually, globally, about 70% of GDP comes from labor, and the GDP growth is faster than the growth of wages, which actually indicates that the wealth gap is becoming increasingly severe. People are not getting their share, and the proportion of wages in the economy is very small, which is due to the wealth gap. Donald Trump initiated a trade war, forcing China to shift its economy to consider the importance of the domestic market and the sustainability of economic development. Sorry, but the Communist Party doesn't see it this way. To truly expand the domestic demand market, the Chinese government must relinquish power, which is crucial. The Chinese government only seeks more and more power. It will not loosen its grip. Changing the current reliance on industrial policies and government-led models. In fact, his proposal is for liberalization. Let capital move on its own, without being driven by government-led induced trial policies and government-led funding. All right, to expand domestic demand, more funds need to be allocated to social security and welfare, especially to ensure that those 500 to 600 million rural residents receive the same treatment as urban residents. This is what I advocate for, abolishing the household registration system and equalizing welfare across the country. The current model lacks this. It aligns with the government's power logic, which the government favors. Wang Yasheng once said something very classic, which I also support. He said, a famous saying, industrial policies, industrial parks, urban planning, and large-scale infrastructure are essentially all about strengthening government power, because what they do is increase the ability to control society. If you liberalize them, it reduces the impact on society. The control ability. The Chinese leadership does not believe that Donald Trump's tariffs can be sustained. Will soon dissipate. The U.S. is facing various pressures from the bond market, consumer sentiment, and political backlash. The U.S. debt market. This round is very fearful, with this 8 trillion debt to worry about, to be afraid to buy. Consumers were hit hard by inflation last time, which sank Biden, along with political backlash. Wang Yasheng criticized Donald Trump's tariff policy as being counterproductive. Backlash harmed the U.S. economy, increased the risk of recession, and weakened the bargaining chips, which is completely wrong. Unlike in 2018, it's very difficult for China to re-export goods to Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Mexico, and then sell them to the U.S., because the U.S. will block this loophole. Even if China sells these products to Vietnam, when the U.S. negotiates with these countries, it stipulates that they will impose tariffs to block them, like a dam holding back the water from the mainland. Although the trade war might lead to a global recession, Wang Yasheng believes that the Chinese regime is still far from a collapse. The past economic downturns and the COVID-19 pandemic have proven that even with significant economic difficulties, they will not transform into political instability or regime change. It won't happen. They can control it, you know. An authoritarian regime only collapses under one condition, which is a split at the top. And currently, China's top leadership shows no obvious divisions or power struggles. Everyone is aligning with Xi Jinping. So those who think Xi Jinping is being sidelined, I find it amusing. It's pointless.